society warned her to fear. Her eyes wild, her voice cracking with terror as she begs them to save the one person she loves most. Inside the barn behind her, a rope tightens around an old man's throat, and the hands holding it belong to someone who should have protected him. But desperation doesn't ask permission before it destroys everything. Before we dive in, quick question. Where are you watching this from right now? Is it early morning with coffee in your hand, or late at night when you should already be asleep? Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story reaches, because what happened on that dusty Texas road is something you will never see coming. Also, hit that subscribe button right now. Now let's get into the story. The Texas sun hung low and merciless over County Road 7, turning the dust into gold and the heat into something you could taste. The kind of afternoon where the world felt suspended between breathless and breaking, where even the cicadas seemed too tired to sing. 3 Harleys cut through that stillness like thunder through prayer. Stark rode point, his leather vest catching the light, the Hell's Angels patch on his back worn soft from years of wind and weather. Behind him, Ben and Whitewasher flanked him in loose formation, brothers not by blood but by every scar and promise that mattered more. They were riding back from the veterans' shelter outside Amarillo, where they dropped off donated supplies and stayed longer than planned because old soldiers told stories that deserved listening. The engines rumbled steady, a rhythm Stark felt in his chest more than heard, the kind of peace that only came on long, empty roads where the world couldn't touch you. That peace lasted exactly 17 seconds longer. The scream tore through the air like fabric ripping, high, desperate, the kind of sound that bypassed your brain and went straight to something older, something primal that recognized terror before it understood words. Stark's hand twitched on the throttle. His eyes scanned the road ahead, looking for the source, and that's when he saw her. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, bursting from a gap in the fence line like she'd been shot from a cannon. Her feet were bare, her yellow dress torn at the hem and streaked with dirt. Hair tangled wild around a face that was all eyes, huge, terrified, locked onto the approaching bikes like they were the last thing standing between her and the end of the world. She ran straight into the middle of the road, arms waving, mouth open in a cry that hadn't stopped since she'd started running. Help! Somebody please help! Stark's instinct was to swerve. You didn't stop for strangers on empty roads, not when you wore the patch, not when half the county already thought you were the devil riding chrome, but something in her face froze him. Not the fear. He'd seen fear before. It was the hope underneath it. The desperate, irrational belief that these 3 men on roaring machines might actually save her instead of ride past like everyone else always did. His hand squeezed the brake. The Harley growled to a stop 15 feet from where she stood, chest heaving, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Ben and Whitewasher pulled up on either side, engines idling low, both men looking to Stark for the call. They'd ridden together long enough to read each other's silence. What's the play here, brother? Stark killed his engine. The sudden quiet felt louder than the bikes had been. Hey! His voice came out rougher than he meant, gravel and smoke from too many years of too many things. He stayed on the bike, hands visible, non-threatening. Kids scared easy, especially of men who looked like him. What's wrong? The girl stumbled forward, her small hands reaching for his vest like it was a lifeline, words tumbling out so fast they tripped over each other. They're hurting my grandpa, in the barn. Please, you have to come there, her voice cracked, broke. They're strangling him. Please. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Stark looked past her, following the line of her pointing finger toward a structure barely visible through the scrub brush and mesquite, a barn, half collapsed on one side, red paint peeling like sunburned skin. Even from here, he could see it was wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Behind him, Ben swore softly. Stark. I see it. Stark swung off his bike in one fluid motion, dropping to one knee so he was eye level with the girl. Up close, he could see she was shaking, full body tremors that had nothing to do with the heat. What's your name, sweetheart? Hey, Alice. She grabbed his vest with both hands, fingernails digging into leather. My grandpa, his name's Joe, he can't breathe, please, please. Alice, listen to me. Stark's voice dropped lower, steadier, the tone he'd used on battlefields when everything was chaos and someone needed an anchor. How many people in that barn? My mom and grandpa and, fresh tears spilled. Nana told me to run. She said find help or he's gonna die. Stark looked up at Ben and Whitewasher. Didn't need to say anything. They were already moving, engines roaring back to life. You're gonna ride with me." Stark lifted Alice like she weighed nothing, settling her in front of him on the bike, her small body pressed against his chest. "Hold on tight to my vest. Don't let go, understand?" She nodded frantically, fingers locking into the leather. Stark kicked his Harley to life, the engine's growl vibrating through both of them. He could feel her heart hammering against his forearm, a hummingbird's wings, fast and fragile. "Which way?" he asked. Alice pointed with one shaking hand toward the barn, toward whatever nightmare she'd run from, and Stark felt something cold and familiar settle into his gut. The same feeling he'd had overseas when the radio crackled and the mission changed and suddenly you were riding toward gunfire instead of away from it. He twisted the throttle. The three bikes exploded forward, dust kicking up in rooster tails behind them, engines screaming loud enough to wake the dead or warn the living. "We're coming, and hell's coming with us." Alice's grandpa's cries had faded by the time they'd found her. Now, as the barn grew larger in Stark's vision, half-collapsed, sun-bleached, surrounded by scrub grass and broken fence posts, he could only hear silence. The worst kind of silence. The kind that came after. Stark's jaw clenched. His hands were steady on the handlebars, but something deeper was coiling tight, ready to spring. Ben pulled up on his left, whitewasher on his right, three bikes forming a wall of chrome and leather and barely contained violence. The barn loomed ahead, its shadow stretching long across the dirt. Stark muttered under his breath, quiet enough that only Alice could hear, "Something's wrong here." The bikes skidded to a stop in a spray of gravel and dust, engines idling like caged animals. And inside that barn something waited, something that would change everything these men thought they knew about justice, mercy, and the thin line between saving someone and destroying yourself. Stark swung off his bike, boots hitting dirt. The storm was about to break. The barn doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, one side dragging against dirt packed hard by decades of use and neglect. Stark didn't knock. Didn't announce himself. He just kicked the door open with enough force that it slammed against the interior wall, sending splinters of rotted wood spinning through shafts of dusty sunlight. What he saw inside stopped him cold. Grandpa Joe lay crumpled on the barn floor like discarded laundry, his weathered face purple-gray, lips parted in a silent gasp. Rope burns circled his neck in angry red welts, the kind that would scar if he lived long enough to let them heal. And standing over him, trembling wild-eyed, holding the frayed end of rope like it was a snake she couldn't let go of, was a woman Stark instantly recognized as Alice's mother. Ella. Her hair hung in sweaty tangles around a face that looked like it had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Mascara streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. Her hands shook so violently the rope twitched like something alive. And her eyes, God, her eyes, they weren't the eyes of someone who'd want to fight. They were the eyes of someone who just realized what losing everything actually looked like. "Don't," Ella's voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Don't come closer, I didn't mean," he wouldn't listen. Ben was already moving past Stark, instinct overriding shock, but Whitewasher grabbed his arm. "Easy, brother." Because this wasn't what they'd expected. This wasn't some stranger beating an old man. This was something worse, something tangled and broken and wrong in ways that made violence seem simple by comparison. "Step away from him." Stark's voice came out flat, emotionless, the kind of calm that was more dangerous than shouting. He moved forward slowly, hands visible, eyes never leaving Ella's face. "Right now." "I didn't want to," Ella stumbled backward, the rope finally falling from her fingers. "They said if he didn't sign." "Mama." The scream came from behind them. Alice tried to rush past Stark, but he caught her with one arm, holding her back even as she thrashed and sobbed. "Let me go. That's my mama." And then another voice, brittle and broken. "Oh God. Oh God, Joe." An older woman burst through a side door Stark hadn't noticed. Nana, he realized, Alice's grandmother. She was small, gray-haired, wearing a flour-dusted apron, and the sound that came from her throat when she saw her husband on the ground was the kind of noise that haunted you forever. Stark made his decision in half a heartbeat. "Ben, grab water from your pack." "White," he hesitated, jaw clenching. Something about this scene didn't add up. "Call the sheriff." "No." Alice's scream was so sudden, so visceral, that everyone froze. She tore free from Stark's grip and planted herself between him and her mother, small chest heaving, fists clenched, tears streaming but her voice somehow steady through the chaos. "You can't call them. They'll take my mom." Please, she didn't mean it. Please don't. The confusion that rippled through the barn was almost visible. Stark stared at this 8-year-old girl who just begged them to save her grandfather, now begging them not to turn on the woman who'd nearly killed him. Ben and Whitewasher exchanged glances that said the same thing. What the hell is going on here? Nana had dropped to her knees beside Joe, hands hovering over his chest like she was afraid touching him would break something irreparable. He's breathing, she whispered, her voice thick with tears and something that might have been relief or might have been grief, hard to tell which. Joe, baby, stay with me. Stark knelt on Joe's other side, pressing 2 fingers against the old man's neck. The pulse was there, thready, weak, but there. Rope burns circled his throat like a necklace from hell, and his breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps that said he was teetering on the edge of something they might not be able to pull him back from. He needs a hospital, Stark said quietly. And she? He looked up at Ella, who'd collapsed against the barn wall, sliding down until she was sitting in the dirt, face buried in her hands. She needs to explain what the hell just happened here. I'll tell you. Nana's voice cracked but held. She wiped her eyes with the back of one shaking hand and looked directly at Stark with a gaze that had seen too much and was done hiding from any of it. But first, please, help him. Whatever else happens, please don't let him die. The desperation in her voice, the raw, unvarnished need, was something Stark recognized from 100 dark places he'd tried to forget. He stood slowly, his shadow falling across Joe's still form. Outside, the Texas sun beat down merciless and indifferent. Inside this barn that smelled like hay and desperation, 4 adults and 1 child stood at the center of something that looked like violence but felt like tragedy. Stark's hand moved toward his phone. Alice grabbed his wrist with both her small hands. Please, she whispered. Please don't take my mama away. And in that moment, with an old man barely breathing, a daughter who'd nearly killed him sobbing against rotted wood, a grandmother trying to hold the pieces together, and a child begging for mercy she didn't understand, Stark realized this wasn't a rescue. This was something far more complicated. Something that didn't have easy answers or clean endings. Something that would require them to be more than muscle and engines. His eyes met Ben's across the barn. Then Whitewasher's. The silent question passed between them. What do we do? Because whatever they decided in the next 60 seconds would determine whether this story ended in justice or just more wreckage. Stark looked down at Alice's tear-streaked face, at her mother's broken expression, at Joe's purple throat. Start talking, he said quietly to Nana. And make it fast. The barn felt smaller now, like the walls were pressing in with every breath. Sunlight sliced through gaps in the warped wood, illuminating dust motes that drifted like tiny ghosts between the living and whatever came after. Nana's hands trembled as she smoothed Joe's gray hair back from his forehead, her touch gentle despite the violence still hanging in the air. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady, the kind of steady that came from deciding the truth was worse than the shame of hiding it. It started 6 months ago, she whispered, when Ella's husband left. Stark stayed crouched beside Joe, monitoring his breathing, but his attention shifted to the grandmother. Ben leaned against a support beam, arms crossed. Whitewasher stood near the door, watching Ella like she might bolt or collapse. Ella hadn't moved from where she'd slid down the wall. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, face buried, shoulders shaking with silent sobs that looked like they were tearing her apart from the inside. Medical bills, Nana continued, her voice cracking. Alice needed surgery. Her appendix burst last spring. Emergency room, hospital stay, specialists. She closed her eyes. $73,000. And Ella's ex, he took everything when he left. Cleaned out the accounts, maxed the credit cards, disappeared like smoke. Alice pressed herself against Stark's leg, small and silent, listening to her family's destruction laid bare in fragments. She was drowning, Nana said. Working double shifts at the diner, selling everything she owned, but it wasn't enough. The collectors started calling 20 times a day. Then the letters came, red ink, threats, lawsuits. Her hand tightened on Joe's. She was going to lose Alice. Child Services was sniffing around because she couldn't afford heat in the winter, couldn't keep food in the house. So she came to you. Stark's voice was flat, filling in the blanks. Asked for help. We gave her everything we had. Nana's tears fell freely now. But we're farmers. This land, she gestured vaguely at the barn, the fields beyond, it's all we got. The crops barely break even anymore. We're one bad season from losing it ourselves. That's when they showed up, Ella's voice cut in, raw and broken. She hadn't lifted her head, but the words spilled out like infection from a wound. 3 men in suits. Said they were investment consultants. Said they could make all my problems disappear. The pieces were starting to fit together in Stark's mind, forming a picture he'd seen too many times before. Predators in nice clothes. Desperation dressed up as opportunity. They knew everything, Ella continued, her voice hollow. How much I owed. Where I worked. Alice's school. They knew I was out of options. She finally looked up, and the devastation in her eyes made even Stark, who'd seen men die in deserts halfway around the world, want to look away. They said if I could convince my daddy to sign over the farm as collateral, they'd loan me enough to clear the debt. Said it was just paperwork. That we'd never actually lose the land. But Joe refused, Ben said quietly. Nana nodded, her jaw tight. Because he's not stupid. He saw right through them, lease-to-own scams, predatory lending, whatever fancy words they dressed it up in. Soon as he signed, they'd own this place. We'd be renters in our own home until they found an excuse to evict us. I tried to make him understand. Ella's voice rose, desperate, defensive. I begged him. Told him it was the only way. That Alice and I would end up on the street. That child services would take her, her breath hitched. And he just kept saying no. Kept saying we'd find another way. But there was no other way. So they turned up the pressure, Stark said, watching her carefully. Ella's laugh was bitter, broken. They started showing up at my work. At Alice's school. Left messages that sounded like concern but felt like threats. It would be a shame if something happened. Accidents happen to families who don't cooperate. One of them cornered me in the parking lot last week and said, her voice cracked. Said if I didn't deliver the signature by today, they'd make sure I lost everything anyway. That they had connections in child services. That Alice would disappear into the system and I'd never see her again. The barn went silent except for Joe's labored breathing and Alice's quiet sniffling. This morning, Ella whispered, they called. Said they were coming at noon to collect. Either I had the signed papers or... She couldn't finish. So I came here. Begged Daddy one more time. And when he still said no, when he said he'd rather lose everything than sign his family over to criminals, I just... Her hands rose to her face, fingers tangled in her hair. I didn't plan it. The rope was just there, hanging on the wall. And I thought if I could just scare him, just make him understand how serious this was, you tried to kill your own father. Whitewasher's voice was cold, disgusted. I tried to save my daughter. Ella's scream echoed through the barn, feral and desperate. You don't know what it's like. Watching your child go hungry. Choosing between electricity and medicine. Knowing that no matter what you do, how hard you work, it's never enough. She was sobbing now, words barely coherent. I'm her mother. I'm supposed to protect her. And I was failing. I am failing. Nana's voice cut through the chaos, soft but devastatingly clear. Desperation can make a daughter forget she's someone's child too. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through everyone present. Stark looked at Joe's bruised throat. At Ella's shattered expression. At Alice, who stood between her dying grandfather and her broken mother, loving them both and understanding neither. This wasn't simple. This wasn't villains and victims. This was what happened when the system crushed people slowly, carefully, until they turned on each other just to survive. And somewhere out there, 3 men in suits were waiting for a signature. Stark stood slowly, his shadow falling across them all. Those men, he said quietly. The ones who did this to you. You got names. Stark knelt beside Joe with a damp cloth Ben had retrieved from the bike saddlebag, carefully wiping away the dirt and blood crusted around the old man's neck. His hands, scarred, tattooed, built for breaking things, moved with unexpected gentleness as he cleaned the rope burns, revealing the full extent of the damage underneath. The skin was angry red, already bruising purple at the edges. Joe's breathing had steadied slightly, but he still hadn't opened his eyes. Each shallow breath rattled in his chest like loose change in a tin can. Stark tilted Joe's head slightly to get a better angle on a particularly nasty abrasion, and that's when the light caught the old man's face just right. Something shifted in Stark's chest. He froze, cloth suspended mid-motion, staring at Joe's weathered features like he was seeing a ghost. The deep lines around the eyes. The scar on the left temple, faded white with age. The way his jaw sat just slightly crooked, like it had been broken once and healed without being properly set. No. It can't be. But the longer Stark stared, the more certain he became. The years had added weight and gray hair, had carved deeper valleys into the landscape of this man's face, but the bones underneath, those didn't change. Those didn't lie. Stark. Ben's voice came from somewhere far away. You good, brother? Stark didn't answer. Couldn't. His mind was tumbling backward through time, peeling away 18 years like layers of old paint until he landed hard in a memory he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it never happened. Summer. 1995. Stark was 16 and stupid and running from everything. His father's fists, his mother's indifference, a juvenile record that would follow him forever if he stayed. He'd hopped a freight train heading south, sleeping in boxcars and stealing food from gas stations until he ended up in some nowhere Texas town he couldn't even remember the name of. He'd been sleeping behind a red barn, this barn, he realized now with a jolt, curled up in the dirt with his leather jacket for a blanket and his stomach eating itself from the inside out. 3 days without food. 2 without water. Pride keeping him from begging, fear keeping him from stealing from anyone who might actually notice. He woke to the sound of footsteps and the cold reality of being caught. But the man standing over him didn't yell, didn't threaten. Just looked down at this skinny, dirty teenager with too many bruises and not enough hope, and said, You hungry, son? Stark had wanted to say no. Wanted to tell this stranger to go to hell, that he didn't need charity, didn't need pity. But his body betrayed him. His stomach growled so loud it sounded like thunder, and suddenly he was nodding, hating himself for the weakness. The man, Joe, though Stark didn't know his name then, brought him inside. Fed him eggs and toast and coffee so hot it burned going down. Didn't ask questions. Didn't demand explanations. Just let him eat in silence while morning light filtered through kitchen windows that smelled like coffee and kindness. Afterward, Joe had walked him out to an old motorcycle sitting under a tarp behind the barn, a beat-up Honda that hadn't run in years. Together, barely speaking, they'd spent the afternoon fixing it. Changing the oil. Cleaning the carburetor. Joe's hands guiding Stark's, teaching him without lecturing, showing him that broken things could be made whole again if you knew where to look and weren't afraid to get your hands dirty. When the bike finally roared to life, Joe had smiled, small, satisfied, and pressed a $20 bill into Stark's palm. For gas, he'd said. Get yourself somewhere better than here. Stark had stared at the money, throat tight. Why are you helping me? Joe had looked at him for a long moment, and Stark saw something in those eyes he hadn't seen in his own father's in years. Something that might have been recognition, or compassion, or just the simple understanding that some people needed saving and some people were capable of doing the saving. Because somebody helped me once, Joe had said quietly, and because I think you got more in you than you know yet. He'd placed one calloused hand on Stark's shoulder, not heavy, just present, just real. If you ever fix your life, son, fix it good. Stark had ridden away on that Honda, the $20 in his pocket feeling heavier than gold. He'd looked back once, seeing Joe standing in front of that red barn, watching him go. He'd never forgotten that face. And he'd never come back. Until now. Oh God. The words slipped out before Stark could stop them, barely a whisper, carrying weight that made Ben and Whitewasher both straighten. His hand was shaking. The cloth fell from his fingers into the dirt. Joe's eyes fluttered open, cloudy, unfocused, fighting their way back from wherever he'd been. His gaze wandered, landed on Stark's face, and for just a second something flickered there. Recognition? Maybe. Or maybe just confusion from a man who'd nearly been strangled by his own daughter. But Stark saw it. That same look from 18 years ago. The one that said you're worth saving. You. Stark's voice cracked. He pressed his palm against his eyes, fighting tears he hadn't cried since he was the scared 16-year-old sleeping behind this very barn. You fed me. Fixed my bike. You gave me $20 and told me to fix my life good. Nana's breath caught. Her eyes went wide, darting between Stark's face and her husband's. Joe, she whispered, gripping his hand tighter. Is that Joe's lips moved, barely forming words. Leather, jacket, Honda, 250. Yeah. Stark's laugh was broken, wet. That was me. The barn went absolutely silent. Ben stared at Stark like he'd never seen him before. Whitewasher's expression had shifted from suspicion to something approaching awe. Stark stood slowly, his legs unsteady, and turned to face his brothers. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion that couldn't be hidden anymore, didn't need to be. 18 years ago, I was a punk kid running from everything, sleeping in the dirt with nothing. This man, he pointed at Joe without looking away from Ben and Whitewasher, this man didn't know me. Didn't owe me anything. But he fed me. Taught me how to fix my first bike. Gave me money for gas and told me I was worth more than I thought I was. His jaw clenched. Tears tracked openly down his face now, cutting through dust and decades of carefully maintained walls. I wouldn't be here without him. Wouldn't have straightened out. Wouldn't have joined the service. Wouldn't have found the club. Wouldn't have found you. His voice dropped to something fierce and final. That man on the ground, he saved my life when he had every reason not to. Stark turned back to Joe, dropped to one knee beside him, and placed his hand over the old man's heart. The gesture was almost reverent. We owe this man, he said quietly, the words carrying the weight of blood debt and sacred promise. Whatever it takes, we make this right. Ben nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, Whitewasher echoed. And in that moment, in a half-collapsed barn filled with dust and desperation, and the ghost of a kindness shown 18 years ago to a kid who had nothing, fate stopped being random and started being deliberate. This wasn't a rescue anymore. This was repayment. This was the universe circling back around, closing a loop that had been open for nearly 2 decades, putting Stark exactly where he needed to be on the exact day Joe needed him most. Alice watched the tattooed bikers with wide eyes, not understanding but feeling the shift, the way the air changed when men decided that mercy wasn't weakness and debts weren't just about money. Nana clutched her husband's hand and wept, not from grief this time, but from something that felt dangerously close to hope. And Joe, barely conscious, managed the smallest nod. Like he'd known all along that the scared kid he'd fed and fixed and sent on his way would come back. Not as a boy running, but as a man willing to fight. The ambulance had come and gone, taking Joe to County General with Nana clutching his hand in the back. The paramedics had given Stark a long look, leather vest, tattoos, standing in a barn that smelled like violence. But Nana's voice had been firm. These men saved him. Let them be. Now, as twilight bled orange across the Texas sky, Stark stood in that same barn with Ella sitting on an overturned crate, face hollow, waiting for the police she knew were coming. Except Stark hadn't called them yet. "Show me everything," he said quietly. Ella looked up, confusion flickering through the numbness. What? The contracts. The business cards. The messages. Everything those men gave you, I want to see it. Ben shifted his weight, arms crossed. Stark, we can't just. Can't what? Stark's voice was steel-wrapped in calm. Hand her over so she gets processed, charged, and buried while the real criminals walk away. He looked at Ella, and something in his expression softened, just slightly. Someone used her. Pushed her to this point. Made her desperate enough to nearly kill her own father. His jaw clenched. I want those someones. Whitewasher tilted his head, understanding dawning. You want to go after the syndicate. I want justice. Real justice. Not just the easy kind. Ella's hands trembled as she pulled her phone from her pocket, scrolling with shaking fingers. They texted me this morning. Said they'd be here at noon to collect. Stark took the phone, eyes scanning the messages. Professional. Cold. Threats wrapped in corporate language. Failure to comply will result in alternative collection methods, and we trust you understand the consequences of non-cooperation. Names, Stark said. I need names. Marcus Vance. He's the one who recruited me. Ella's voice was barely audible. The other two, I only know them as Mr. Shaw and Mr. Dietrich. They came to the diner, said they were investment consultants from some firm in Dallas. Ben was already searching on his phone. Vance Holdings, LLC. Registered in Delaware, operations across Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma. He scrolled. Complaints filed with the Attorney General's office, 12 families claiming predatory lending practices, forged documents, illegal seizures. His expression darkened. Nothing stuck. They've got lawyers that make charges disappear. Not this time, Stark said quietly. He handed the phone back to Ella. What else you got? Papers? Recordings? There's a folder. In my car. She stood unsteadily. Contracts they wanted Daddy to sign. Business cards. A USB drive with voice messages from Marcus. Instructions on how to convince him. Get it. 20 minutes later, they sat under the flickering neon sign of Buck's Roadhouse, a dive bar 10 miles outside Amarillo where nobody asked questions and the whiskey was cheap enough to make forgetting easy. The folder sat open on a scarred wooden table between them. Fake contracts that promised salvation and delivered ruin, business cards with embossed logos that meant nothing, and a USB drive that held hours of manipulation disguised as guidance. Stark listened to one recording, Marcus Vance's smooth voice explaining exactly how to isolate the target, exploit their fear, make them believe signing was the only option. Clinical. Calculated. Evil dressed up in business casual. He ejected the drive and looked at his brothers. We go after them directly, it's assault. Intimidation. Gives them ammunition. Stark's fingers drummed the table. But if we can make them confess, on camera, in their own words, then it's evidence. Then it's justice the law can't ignore. How? Ben asked. These aren't street thugs. They're connected. Careful. Everyone's got a pressure point. Stark leaned back, thinking. Vance recruited Ella at her lowest. Preyed on her desperation. Men like that, they're bullies in expensive suits. Push back hard enough, fast enough, and they fold. Whitewasher grinned slowly. You want to set a trap. I want to give them rope. See if they hang themselves with it. Stark pulled out his phone. Ella sends a message, tells Vance she got the signature, but needs to meet in person to hand over the documents. Public place. Daylight. Cameras everywhere. And we record everything, Ben said, catching on. Every word. Every threat. Every admission. Stark's smile was cold. We make the devils confess themselves. The plan took shape in whispered strategy and shared understanding. These men who'd learned combat in deserts and loyalty in chapters, applying military precision to civilian justice. No blood. No chaos. Just truth, weaponized and impossible to deny. Stark looked at the USB drive, at the evidence of systematic cruelty, and thought about Joe's bruised throat. About Alice's terrified scream. About Ella's desperation that had nearly destroyed her family. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we end this. Outside, engines rumbled in the parking lot, other brothers arriving, answering the call without needing details, because that's what family did. The storm was building. And this time it would break exactly where it needed to. The Cattleman's Diner sat on the edge of Amarillo like a relic from a better time. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, coffee that tasted like burnt regret but cost less than bottled water. At 11 a.m., it was nearly empty except for truckers nursing hangovers and retirees stretching breakfast into lunch. Ella sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched, phone face up on the table. The text she'd sent an hour ago still glowed on the screen. Got the signature. Need to meet. Noon at Cattleman's. Across the diner, tucked into separate booths and scattered at the counter, Stark, Ben, and Whitewasher waited. No vests. No visible patches. Just 3 men in plain clothes with phones angled just right, recording apps already running, cameras hidden in shirt pockets and ball caps. The biker code wasn't just about loyalty and brotherhood. It was about knowing when muscle mattered and when strategy did. Today was strategy. At 11:58, 3 men in suits walked through the door. Marcus Vance led the way, mid-40s, expensive haircut, smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, Shaw and Dietrich flanked like corporate enforcers, all polish and predatory confidence. They spotted Ella immediately and crossed the diner with the casual arrogance of men who'd never been told no. Vance slid into the booth across from her. Mrs. Coldwell, I'm pleased you came to your senses. Ella's voice shook. I have the papers. He signed. Excellent. Vance's smile widened. You're doing the right thing. For Alice. For your future. Shaw leaned against the booth, arms crossed. The deed transfer, it's notarized? Yes. Ella fumbled with a folder, hands trembling. Everything you asked for. Stark watched from 3 booths away, phone recording every word. Ben had positioned himself at the counter with a clear sight line. Whitewasher sat near the door, blocking the exit. Vance took the papers, scanning them with practiced efficiency. His expression shifted, confusion, then suspicion. These aren't signed. I know. Ella's voice cracked. Because I'm not doing this anymore. The temperature in the diner dropped 10 degrees. Dietrich straightened, his pleasant mask slipping. Mrs. Caldwell, I don't think you understand the situation. He didn't rush. Didn't shout. Just rose from his booth and walked over with the calm of a man who'd already won and was just collecting the evidence. Vance's eyes tracked him, taking in the tattoos, the scar, the quiet danger radiating off him like heat. Who the hell are you? Stark pulled out his phone, screen showing the recording app with a timestamp and red light blinking. He placed it on the table between them, then smiled, cold, satisfied. They don't have to believe us. He tilted his head toward the window where Ben stood outside, phone pointed directly at their booth. Then toward Whitewasher at the counter, doing the same. They'll watch you. The color drained from Vance's face. Threats. Manipulation. Confession of predatory lending. Stark's voice was conversational, almost pleasant. All recorded. Multiple angles. Audio and video. He leaned down, eyes locked on Vance. And uploaded to cloud storage the second you walked through that door. Shaw lunged forward, but Whitewasher was already moving, positioning himself between Shaw and the booth. Not threatening. Just present. You can't, Dietrich started. Already did. Ben's voice carried from the counter. Also sent copies to the Texas Attorney General's office, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and 3 news outlets. He checked his watch. Should hit inboxes in about 4 minutes. The silence was absolute. Vance's hands clenched into fists on the table. You have no idea what you've done. We have lawyers. Connections. This will disappear like everything else. Maybe. Stark straightened. But this time, 12 other families you've scammed will see it. They'll come forward. You made this personal when you put your hands on someone I owe a debt to. His smile vanished. Bad move. Nana knelt beside Joe's bed, hands clasped in prayer, whispering words too soft for anyone else to hear. The machines beeped steadily, heart rate, oxygen, all the numbers that meant he was still here, still fighting. Alice sat cross-legged in the chair beside the bed, her small hand wrapped around her grandfather's fingers. She'd been sitting like that for hours, refusing to leave, refusing to let go. Joe's eyes fluttered open, cloudy at first, then gradually focusing. His gaze found Alice, and something in his expression softened. Hey baby girl, he rasped, voice wrecked from the rope. Alice's face crumpled. Tears spilled over as she squeezed his hand tighter. Grandpa. You're awake. You're okay. Takes more than that to kill an old farmer. He tried to smile, winced. Your mama. She's okay. The angels came. Alice's voice was small but certain. The angels came, Grandpa. Just like in the stories. Joe's brow furrowed in confusion until Nana leaned close, smoothing his hair back. Bikers, she whispered. 3 of them. One of them was the boy you helped all those years ago. Her voice broke. They saved you. And now they're saving all of us. Joe's eyes drifted closed again, but his hand tightened around Alice's. Outside the hospital window, 3 more Harleys pulled into the parking lot, brothers answering the call, ready to stand witness to whatever came next. The storm had broken. And for once, it was washing away exactly the right kind of filth. By sunrise, the video had 17,000 views. By noon, it had 500,000. Stark stood outside the Potter County Courthouse, arms crossed, watching the crowd swell like a living thing. Reporters. Camera crews. Protesters with hastily scrawled signs. Protect our families and justice for Joe. The footage had spread faster than wildfire, jumping from local Facebook groups to Twitter to national news networks in less than 12 hours. Someone had titled it "Bikers Expose Land Scam Syndicate," and the algorithm had done the rest. Behind Stark, 11 more angels had shown up overnight, brothers from Lubbock, Midland, even one crew from El Paso. They formed a loose perimeter around the courthouse steps, silent as sentinels, engines idling in the street like a mechanical heartbeat. At 9:47 a.m., 3 police cruisers pulled up. Marcus Vance, Shaw, and Dietrich emerged in handcuffs, their expensive suits rumpled, faces pale. The crowd erupted, shouting, jeering, phones held high to capture every second of their perp walk. Vance kept his eyes down. Shaw looked sick. Dietrich had the expression of a man watching his entire life collapse in real time. "How's it feel?" someone yelled from the crowd. "Preying on families, how's it feel now?" A woman pushed forward, tears streaming. "You tried to take my parents' ranch. 2 years you hounded them." Others joined her chorus. 12 families, just like Ben had said, emerging from silence now that someone had finally made the predators bleed. Stark watched it all with grim satisfaction. This was justice, messy, loud, public. The kind that couldn't be swept under expensive legal briefs. Stark. He turned. Ben was jogging toward him, phone extended. "You need to see this." The screen showed a news broadcast, Channel 7 Amarillo, their morning anchor looking directly into camera with an expression that mixed shock and something approaching admiration. What local media is now calling the Angels Mercy Ride. 3 members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club intervened yesterday to save a local farmer from an assault, then systematically exposed a multi-state land fraud operation that has victimized dozens of families. The footage, recorded by the bikers themselves, has sparked national outrage and calls for federal investigation into predatory lending practices targeting rural communities. The screen cut to the diner footage, crystal clear, devastating. Vance's threats. Shaw's arrogance. The moment Stark revealed the recordings with that cold smile. Public perception of motorcycle clubs has long been fraught with stereotypes, the anchor continued. But today, these men are being hailed not as outlaws, but as heroes. Ben grinned. "We're trending on 3 platforms. Hashtag Angels Mercy Ride is number 2 nationally." Stark shook his head slowly, not quite believing it. World's gone insane. Or maybe it just needed someone to do the right thing loud enough that people couldn't ignore it. Movement near the courthouse entrance drew Stark's attention. 2 officers emerged with Ella between them, no cuffs yet, but her hands were trembling, face streaked with tears. She'd turned herself in that morning, just like Stark had told her to. Faced it head-on instead of running. The crowd's mood shifted instantly. "That's her," someone shouted. "That's the one who tried to kill her own father." The anger was immediate, visceral. People surged forward, not violent yet, but close, that mob mentality starting to coalesce into something ugly. "She's a monster. Lock her up. How could you do that to your own?" Stark moved without thinking. He stepped directly into the crowd's path, putting himself between Ella and the advancing mass of fury. Whitewasher and Ben flanked him immediately, forming a human barrier. "Back up," Stark said quietly. Not shouting. Not threatening. Just absolute. The crowd hesitated, confused. The same bikers who'd exposed the criminals were now protecting the woman who'd strangled her father? She tried to kill an old man. A middle-aged woman pushed forward, face red with rage. "She doesn't deserve protection." "Maybe not," Stark said evenly. "But she deserves a trial." If you believe that mercy is stronger than vengeance, and that the most unexpected people can become heroes when it matters most, like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories like this. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you, because if this story moved you, those will too.